Republican Congressman Mike McCaul. He's the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee. Mr. Chairman, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.
Very quickly, are you embarrassed that the leader of your party, the commander-in-chief, the president of the United States, is spending his time on Twitter launching an attack like this rather than focusing in on very serious challenges facing the country right now?
Well, I think it's a huge distraction from the real issues at hand. We just passed Kate's Law in sanctuary cities an hour ago in the Congress. We have serious threats facing the nation. We'll be talking about the laptop ban. I know you'll be getting into that. Serious national security issues. I wish you would tweet more about those issues that I think the American people are more concerned about, real issues that face real Americans.
Why do you think he does this?
I can't explain it. I think he has found power in the tweets that he does. I think this may be a throwback to the campaign where he had 25 million Twitter followers, and he finds some power in doing this. But I would, again, I think, try to stay on message here. We're dealing with some very serious policy issues in the Congress, whether it be health care reform, tax reform, border security, and national security issues, that we would prefer him to tweet about those issues.
Let's talk about some major substantive issues. The Senate, now for a second time, they've just passed new sanctions legislation, a bill tightening sanctions against Russia and Iran, for that matter. I think the vote was, 98-2. Only 2 senators opposed it. It's now come before the House. I assume you're going to vote for it, but the White House seems to be resisting this tightening of sanctions against Russia right now. What's your understanding?
Well, it did pass overwhelmingly in the Senate. I know it's on its way to the House. It will be reviewed by the House. I'm also on the Foreign Affairs Committee, a very senior member on that committee. We'll be taking a look at this. There are a couple of issues related to energy companies and national security waivers, but I think we all agree that after what Russia's done in Crimea and in eastern Ukraine, where I just came back from, in addition to the cyber attacks on our democratic process and the elections, that Russia needs to be sanctioned.
Well, do you believe the president is committed to holding the Russians, Putin particularly, accountable for interfering in the U.S. presidential election?
I think he would like some flexibility with the sanctions, but I think we all agree, and we all got the briefing, that Russia interfered in our democratic process. They did attempt to influence the presidential election. And at the time I got those briefings, Wolf, last October, at that time a classified setting, now unclassified, I was very vocal about the fact that Russia needs to be called out for what they did, and there needs to be consequences to their actions. And I think the sanction bill really addresses that bad behavior.
The president doesn't seem to be convinced. As you know, he calls it a hoax, a witch hunt. He doesn't seem to be convinced. How do you explain that?
Well, I think he doesn't want any optics. His election could be illegitimate. It was a legitimate election. I think the question is what, if any, influence these Russian hacks had on the election system and the presidential election. Haven't seen any hard evidence of that to date, but just the fact that they tried to do it disturbs me. And I think they need to, there need to be consequences to that. And let's not forget that we have another election coming up in 2018. Foreign adversaries have always tried to influence our elections, whether it be Russia or China. When I prosecuted the Johnny Chung case that led to the director of Chinese intelligence trying to influence our elections by putting money into the Clinton campaign, this is nothing new. They've always tried to do this. They just have a new tool, and it's a cyber tool.
You're the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee at the Department of Homeland Security. As you know, they're implementing new security measures to avoid having to ban laptops from flights coming into the United States. The Secretary Kelly says the threat has not diminished. Should Americans feel safe right now flying with laptops in the main cabin and in the baggage compartment?
Well, you know, Al-Qaeda and ISIS, the crown jewel for them is aviation, always has been. And I think they're still trying to target and bring down aircraft, airliners, inbound into the United States. This threat, I can tell you, is one of the most serious and consequential and potentially destructive threats I've seen since 9/11. I think the Secretary is taking the correct precautions by having a laptop ban on the 10 major high-risk last point of departure airports, but also expanding it to 280 airports that are also last point of departure airports. If they can't comply with these new security standards, then, of course, they may be put on the list of a laptop ban. We have to put the safety of the traveling public first and foremost.
Parts of the president's travel ban will go into effect about an hour and a half or so from now. Is there a national security rationale, Mr. Chairman, for what relationships are considered bona fide? What is the national security rationale, for example, why a grandparent or a fiancé is more of a threat than a half-sibling or mother-in-law?
Well, if you have a bona fide relationship to the United States, as I understand it, under what the Supreme Court has come down with, you can still come back into the United States. These countries didn't come out of thin air. 4 were out of my visa waiver security bill, 3 added by the Obama administration. And what it is, it's supposed to be a temporary ban until we can have higher vetting in high-threat areas. And I think that's really the key here. And, you know, it's been 6 months since this executive order's come out, and I've urged the administration to start beginning the process of finding how to better vet these high-threat areas. This was not supposed to be a permanent ban, but rather a temporary pause, and I think we can achieve that goal.
Congressman McCaul, thanks so much.